A date which will live in infamy.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the Great Crusade.
Early this morning, the Allies began the assault on the northwestern coast of Hitler's European forces.
Bonjour, my name is Clément Horvat, a young Frenchman, history buff, and author of Till Victory, the Second World War by Those Who Were There, published by Pen and Sword Books in October 2020, next month. In this new episode of Till Victory, a podcast about World War II and peace, I'm having a conversation with Allen Greene, a radio operator in the 573rd Signal Aircraft Warning Battalion. I first talked to him a few months after the release of my book here in France, as he had heard that his friend and fellow lawyer, Gunther Half, who served in the 95th Infantry Division, was in it. So Allen contacted me out of the blue and he let me know that he was a veteran himself. He saw the landings on Omaha Beach from the deck of the USS Achernar and took part in the whole campaign here in Europe, spotting enemy aircraft from the ground for the US Army Air Forces. His story is very interesting and I ended up including him in the Tome 2 that was just released here in France. This is a special podcast because tomorrow we'll celebrate the 75th anniversary of the end of the war. And it made sense to release Allen's episode now, as it clearly shows how difficult it was for the veterans to readjust to civilian life. We always think that coming home and World War II finally coming to an end was a big, great celebration, but these young men who put their lives on hold for years had to start over from scratch while dealing with trauma. I can't thank Allen enough for sharing all these very personal memories with all of us. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with this very kind veteran, Allen Greene.
Bonsoir.
Hello, Allen. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
I'm fine, thank you. Very happy to have you on the phone. Are you ready to do this?
I'm ready.
Okay. My first question is, do you remember when war was declared?
I was 17 and in high school, and we used to go to the movies on a Sunday afternoon and then go to a hangout called the Igloo.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got to the Igloo that day, it was, of course, December the 7th, 1941. So they were drafting guys who were 21 years old. Nobody knew where Pearl Harbor was. But when we found out the Japanese had bombed us, why, we all thought, hey, they'll never get to us. We'll never have to go because we had 4 years to go before we were 21. And, well, that turned out to be a little different because when I finished my senior year in high school and I was 18, I got drafted. I got the draft notice in January of 1943, and we went for it, the induction where they kind of screen you to see if you're fit. And my problem was I passed all of the tests down there except for the eye test, and I had very poor eyesight, Clement.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was 2,400 without correction. So that put me in a thing called limited service,
Mm-hmm.
which meant that I guess that you couldn't be, in combat. So that was my introduction. So then when we finally got the call to report, we had the largest number of young men leaving our town that had ever been left for service.
Mm.
And the town I lived in then was called LaSalle, Illinois. And I had moved there from a very small town a couple of years before, but they had the band there playing, music, and the mothers and the fathers were there, and it was very exciting.
Mm.
But what I'd like to, record today is that when that morning, before I, reported, my mother and father worked in a defense plant, and they had to leave to go to work very early, around 5 in the morning. And that morning, that my mother came into my bedroom to wish me goodbye, and she bent down to kiss me, and I felt tears coming down her face, and I just couldn't handle that, so I just pretended I was still asleep. But I'll never forget that moment. And so then it was off to the train station, and we boarded a train down to Scott Field, Illinois, which was way down in the south part of the state. And there we started to become part of the Army. They took away our civilian clothes. They gave us, they fitted us up Army clothes. They gave us shots, tetanus and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was late by the time we got down there, and so they finally took us to a barracks, and barracks was about 40 guys up there. And then all of a sudden, you're alone, and you're lying there, and I said to myself, I thought, well, these guys are all snoring, and I said, what have I got myself into here? But then, after a while, we took the intelligence test, and we took some other test, and then they sent us off to basic training. Well, am I going, way beyond your question?
It's fine. Thank you for sharing all this. What was the job of your unit? What was your role in it?
Well, my role, I was a radio man, and that's what I'm, getting to, because of that limited service designation of the poor eyesight. After basic training, they generally sent you off to some school, either the infantry or radio school or, fork school or some kind of school. And my IQ was like 129. That was pretty much, but that would be enough to get you into officers training. But first of all, my eyesight wouldn't allow that. So after I finished basic training down in Florida, they never sent me to school. They didn't know what to do with me, Clement, I guess, because of my limited service. So I took basic training again. I had 2 basic trainings. You learned to drill and shoot, all that stuff. So finally, they gave me orders to go to Tampa, Florida, to radio school. And I learned to be a radio operator, a radio man. Our job was to accept messages from the radar operators of incoming aircraft, enemy aircraft, and then we would radio the technical air commands to go up and intercept. That was our primary function at first. And we were a non-combat unit, but we were issued weapons, and we were taught how to shoot, because we had to be pretty close to the front lines, because the radar wasn't all that effective. It was not, like it is now, where it could go, for miles and miles. That was our primary job. And as the war went on, and at the end, the radar got a lot better, where we could take and track our planes into enemy targets, even in bad weather, and tell them when to drop the bombs.
And then you were sent to the UK. What was life like over there before the invasion of France?
Well, we got to England in February of 1944. Went over on the Queen Mary with about 16,000 other soldiers. And one night you slept on the deck, and one night you got in a bunk, and there was a zigzag, and a lot of guys, of course, got sick. But we got over there in about 5-6 days, and we landed in Gurrick, Scotland, and got on a train, and they took us down to Henley-on-Thames. Henley is about 40-50 miles from London. It's It's a famous town down there where they had a regatta on the Thames River, it was right on the Thames. It's my recollection that we didn't really do anything operational while we were there. So it was, getting to know the natives or getting to know the locals a little bit. As I say, it was just finding out which pub was getting their beer allotment in and spirits, because that was rationed over there. So, and of course there was the girls, but that was what life was like. And basically we were just waiting, and nothing was happening.
But you had to keep the secret of what was coming. Did you even know anything about the invasion?
Yeah, then we got orders. I think there were in early May of 1944. There were orders came out. In fact, I've got a copy of the orders someplace in my files that put the radio men on detached service, which meant that we were just temporarily going to be part of a different unit. And the orders were that we were to report to the USS Achernar by way of air base down in southern England. And there's where they really clamped down on us as far as the secrecy was concerned. We were not allowed off the base. We were subject to constant roll calls to find out, that you were still there, that you weren't, letting anybody know why you were there, or getting any secrets out, I suppose. It was very hush-hush. I missed a roll call one time. I got to tell you this story. We were playing some card game or something, and I just didn't want to fall out and answer that roll call, because we soldiers used to call chicken shit, when we thought that we weren't being treated right. I got some punishment. My punishment was to mop out, clean up the message center. And so I got the mop in the bucket, and I'm mopping, and here comes two generals. One was General Quesada, who was the general of the 9th Air Force. I had a good time, and I just come up behind him with my mop and asked him to step aside so I could mop the area. So I was moving those generals, around the room, but it sort of kind of pleased me. But anyway, that was the kind of soldier I was.
Yeah.
And then it was right around my birthday, which is May 20. We were loaded on trucks, a truck, and they took us to Plymouth. In your book, it didn't translate out to Plymouth, but that was our port. And there we boarded the Achernar. So we immediately went to work on radios, and we were listening to radio traffic, and none of it was urgent, or none of it was involved, detection of any aircraft. We worked 8 hours on and 8 hours off, 8 hours on, 8 hours off. And it was very tedious, but that was okay. But one day, I'm going to tell you, I was wandering around, and right next to where the radios were was a room, and there was a big map in there. The map was a map of the coast of France. You have to realize that as a corporal, as an enlisted man, they didn't really ask you too much for the tactics and any big decisions. But I thought, something was up here. Nobody had told us that we were just being held for the invasion. But anyway, I had a sneaking suspicion that there was some kind of an operation that was going to occur. And then the night of June the 5th, we were all called together. There was about 20 of us. And this officer, who we'd never known or seen before, came down, called us together, and he said, "Gentlemen," he said, "tomorrow we are invading the coast of France." And, you get 20 GIs together coming, and, there's going to be some horsing around and laughing. But I'm going to tell you, those 20 guys, we all went silent. There was not one whisper going on. And with that, he handed out some armbands that said U.S., a English to French dictionary, and a 5 franc note that was invasion money that they printed. Mm. And with that, we went back around our business, but I can tell you that we were very, very concerned and didn't know what was going to happen, but we were ready.
Yeah, what were your thoughts when you went to sleep that night?
Well, we had a confidence. I don't know. I don't remember. I know I went to sleep. I wish I could answer that, but I was not sleepless. I did not lose sleep. I don't think I had nightmares or anything like that. We were just doing those radios, 8 on, 8 hours off, and we were doing our job. I think I mentioned to you that, the next morning, the orders for the crew was posted, and they said, general quarters at a certain hour and breakfast at a certain hour. And the captain of the ship finished it up with, he said that the rest of this day depends on the will of God and us. I can tell you about the Achernar. I've been, of course, reading a lot about the war now, and I found out General Hodges, that was his command ship. Mm-hmm. He was the commander of the First Army, and one of his fellow, generals was a fellow by the name of Bill Keene. I heard Keene talk on a cruise I took around Normandy one time. But anyhow, I wish I'd have known that he and I both were on the Achernar on D-Day. Our thoughts were I had confidence. All you had to do was go up on deck and look and see all the ships, everything there. It was quite a day.
So you watched the landings on Omaha Beach from the deck of your ship. What could you see from there?
Well, I could see the big ships, the cruisers and the battleships and the destroyers, firing up. And a lot of the ships had what they call barrage balloons attached to them. Those were just inflatable jobs that they would, put on the sterns of all the ships to discourage the Luftwaffe from strafing, coming down too low. If they came in to strafe, they could, hit one of those wires, and that would be the end of them. Mm-hmm. But what I saw was, I saw the war. I saw debris in the water, not just material debris, but human debris. Men that were face down, and it was a sight that made you kind of say, grow up from 19 years old to a man. And then we were standing there with, I had a buddy by the name of Moskowitz. Mm-hmm. We were watching everything, and all of a sudden Moskowitz says, "I'm hit." He caught a piece of shrapnel in his ankle, and that was enough for me. I didn't want any more of that show, so I went down below. But I do remember one other scene. It seems to me, the weather had cleared. It was fairly clear. I think it was kind of in the afternoon. And here comes this skiff comes over, or this boat comes over, and these officers climb aboard the Achernar, and they had to use what they called a Jacob's ladder. Mm-hmm. And it was a rope ladder, and then you went up the ladder, I remember. And what a struggle it was for them to navigate that ladder, because the water is pretty choppy. But then going to mess at night, in order to do so, you had to go through the crew's quarters, and there was they started to bring the wounded on board. And I looked down, and there was this one GI who was just laying there. His eyes were just up and up. He was like he was catatonic. When I looked at the sheets, I saw he only had one leg. So I knelt down beside him, and I asked him if there was anything I could do for him. and he didn't answer me. So that was that day, and I think we were there another 4 or 5 days. And I suppose, of course, they didn't consult me, comment about, what they should do next.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when Hodges, when they had the beachhead and Hodges went ashore, then the Achernar, left and went back to England. The 573rd was down at Henley, and then we went back up to Newcastle on Tyne. That's where we debarked. There was no operations going on there. So we went back over on LSTs in August, maybe a little bit later. I got to tell you this, is that after I graduated from high school in 42, I got a job in a shipyard in central Illinois, and where they made LSTs.
Okay.
And it was kind of ironic that I would be, riding one of those in a uniform, carrying a weapon after just, being a worker on it. But anyway, then we returned to France, I think in late August of 44.
What was your job after that in the month following D-Day?
It was the same. It was the same thing. We landed in Rennes, R-E-N-N-E-S, Rennes. Rennes.
Rennes, yeah.
Then we went up to Saint-Quentin, and we were there for a while, and then we went into Belgium. And that's where I remember, really being operational, manning the radios. And there was quite a bit of traffic, radio traffic going on. There was one night I was taking a message. I get this message, Sam, who was interviewed.
Sam Carlisle, who was in a previous podcast.
Said you could recognize certain guys by their fist.
Yeah.
And that is true. So here comes this message wanting to know where we were. And the fist I didn't recognize. I told this stranger whose fist I did not recognize to go F himself. But
it was German.
It was a German, I'm sure.
Yeah.
See, we had to kind of move with the Air Force. The Air Force was making airfields, to get closer to their targets. So then they moved us from Virton, which was like in South Belgium, I think, up to near Maastricht. And there was a little town up there called Vlijvingen. And that put us right in the crosshairs of the Bulge, because that wasn't very far from Liège.
Yeah.
That was quite a time as well, But we were working the radios then, and by that time they moved me up to headquarters company, where we were, taking messages from the different battalions and companies out in the field, letting them know what was going on and so forth.
It was another stressful time for you, the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah, it was a bad time. We were in the crosshairs of the German offensive. I could see, some of the artillery fire going on. They had the V1 and V2 rockets going off. I guess they were either shooting at London or at Antwerp. And which, Antwerp wasn't very far away. Belgium being a pretty small country. And sometimes those things would cut out. They made a distinctive noise. That's why we called them buzz bombs. And they would cut out, and they would detonate. Pretty close. In fact, we were bivouac in a schoolhouse and sleeping on the floor. And one of them went off, and pretty close, and the concussion was enough to shake everything up. And this one guy, his name was Sid Kaczynski. The breeze sit up off the floor, and he went slamming down on the floor and hurt his back. And next thing you know, he was getting shipped back to the United States. I thought he was one lucky guy. And then they also had these English-speaking Germans in American uniforms that infiltrated our lines, and they liked to sneak up on you and strangle you and do all kinds of mischief. So, and it was cold. And we were cold because we didn't have any winter uniforms. Some of the brass, I think Brad thought the war was going to be over by Christmas, and there was no use issuing us, overcoats and things like that. It was not a good time. We couldn't shower. We couldn't, a lot of things. But I can tell you one story. You want to hear a story?
Sure, of course.
About the closest I ever came to getting killed was by one of our own men, and I was on guard duty, and it was in Flanagan. The guys could go downtown to this town, and there was a pub or a bar down there. They drank, and our captain had one of the guys in tow. His name was Stewart, and Stewart was he was Indian. He was an American Indian descent.
Mm-hmm.
He was drunk, and the captain says, "Greene," he said, "you keep Stewart in the compound here," because he said he's threatened to shoot his. It was Warrant Officer Gordon. So anyway, he leaves. Stewart goes in. The next thing you know, Stewart is coming back out, and he was a motor truck guy, and they gave those guys pistols for their weapon. So he comes. I said, "Stewart," I said, "where are you going?" And he took that pistol and put it right in my stomach.
Wow.
He said, "I'm going down and shoot Warrant Officer Gordon." And I said he was going to practice on me, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Then I started talking loud enough, and I finally got somebody came out and then took him away. And oddly enough, that he got sent down to the infantry because, they were looking for, all the bodies that they could get where the fighting was going on around Boston. So he and another misfit were all sent down there in the infantry. So that was the end of Stewart. But that was as close as I came to getting my lunch.
Must have been very scary.
Yeah. So anyway, after that settled down, then we got into Germany. And I think that we got in there either late February or March. And our first location was in a little town outside of Mönchengladbach. Then we went on up to Munster and then to Braunschweig. We got out to Magdeburg, which was on the Elbe, right there where it ended.
Mm-hmm. Then
they sent us down to a town just about 20 miles from Munich called Fürstenfeldbruck, and it hadn't been touched by any bombing and everything. So we were just being held down there from May, pending going over to Japan, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
That was where we encountered all of the refugees, especially the girls.
Yeah.
Finding their way home. Everything that was a pretty nice time.
Have you talked to a lot of Germans, like prisoners or civilians?
No, these were mainly these gals were mainly from the different countries. They were French. I was on guard duty one time there, and this German soldier comes up and he wants to surrender to me. He says, "Comrade," and I just figured, well, if we took him in, what we were going to do with him, then we'd have to feed him. So I said, "Listen," I said, "go on down the road. You got the British are down the road. Get down there and surrender to them." So I didn't even capture a German. That's one of the things of the war, And Fürstenfeldbruck was, as I say, we were doing nothing. I mean, our outfit was supposed to detect enemy aircraft, and there was no more enemy aircraft.
Yeah.
So all we were doing was playing cards, drinking beer, going to Frankfurt, and enjoying ourselves there, and playing softball.
Great. And how did you celebrate VE Day?
Do I remember VE Day? I don't. I remember when Roosevelt died, and that was in middle of April.
Yeah.
And we were in Munster then. And then on May 8th, we were probably Well, we were probably around Brunswick.
Mhm.
But, the things had really calmed down a lot. And, but we were told that to be careful because some of the German civilians were still, pretty, dangerous. They were upset and they would like to kill you. So it wasn't hard to get a hold of a pistol. So, our regular issue was a carbine. But you couldn't go until parked in the carbine, but you could with a pistol. So whenever we ventured away from the camp, we made sure that we were armed with a pistol.
Mm-hmm.
Never had to use it, thank God. And then we finally get the word that we're going to go to back home, and this is that 40 and 8 deal. 40 men or 8 horses in these old French boxcars.
Yeah.
Got to Marseille, and basically they took your weapon and took a lot of your equipment. See, guys had been doing some black market stuff, and now you had to cash in your marks for dollars. Well, if you had too many marks, you could say, well, you won so much money in gambling, but when it got to be ridiculous, you were detained. Well, I didn't have that kind of money, but guys would offer me so much money if I would cash in some of their marks. And I didn't want to mess around with them. I didn't want to get in trouble. I wanted to get home. So I turned that down.
How was it like to go home at last?
Well, we were put on the Liberty ship, and it took about 14 days to go. And we got back to the United States and landed at Newport News, Virginia. Those Liberty ships for men was like being on a floating cork. I mean, there was just, everybody was seasick, except me. I didn't get seasick, but because I was probably too dumb. But anyway, you got shipped out from there. They had a band playing, and they took you in for a steak dinner, and everybody was cheering you. It was an exciting time.
Yeah.
And you could make a phone call home and talk to your mother and talk to your family. And then they put you on a train to send you to the closest discharge center to your home. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't have a home. My parents were divorced, they got divorced during the time I was in service. My sister and her husband lived way out in South Dakota, and my closest relative was my uncle, who lived in a little town just south of Rockford, Illinois. Well, so I said that was where I was going to land, and they sent me to Camp Grant, and at Camp Grant, you got your finals. I got my Army pay, got the little bonus, and I'd saved some money. So I got on the bus to go down to my uncle's house. As I say, it was only 25 or 30 mile bus ride, and it was in the dead of winter. It was about the 15th, 18th of March. And on the way down, I got sick. I got nauseated. The bus is full of people, and I'm so embarrassed. We get to one of the stops along the way, and I said, I'll get off here. And, the bus driver took me in to the bus stop and got me a cup of coffee. He says, "Hey, soldier," he says, "we'll just wait till you feel better." Mm-hmm. In the meantime, nobody on that bus made a fuss about, well, I got to get going or anything like that. They were very kind. Very kind. I'll never forget that. But I think I got nervous and apprehensive about leaving the Army after 3 years, almost 3 years.
Yeah. At
age 18, now I'm 21, not knowing what the future was going to be.
Yeah.
Because I was on my own. So that was the discharge story.
Yeah, it was hard to readjust to civilian life.
Yes. Well, what I did was I went down to where I'd left the service down in this little town of LaSalle, Illinois, because that's where all my buddies were. They were all coming back from the service. But there was no question about most of us. Took the GI Bill and went back to college. I finished up my 1 year at the junior college there, and then went up to Beloit College in Wisconsin. And I graduated from there in 1949. And then I went to law school in Chicago, and I graduated from there in 1951. So once I got started, Clement, going back to school, I never quit. I went to summer schools. I wanted to get through to my law degree as fast as possible. And then from there, I, of course, passed the bar, and I opened up a law practice in Wheaton, Illinois, which is the suburb of Chicago.
And this is where you met Gunter Half, or Gunner, a veteran of the 95th Infantry Division, who was actually the reason why we got in touch, because his story is in my book. Did you talk about the war together?
You know what? There wasn't a lot of conversation about the war. In fact, Gunner Half, whose letters that started you out on that project, he mentioned a couple of times, a couple of experiences he had. Gunner was one of these guys that they sent to college at first because they were going to train them to be officers. And then as we went on, they didn't need any officers. They put those smart guys in the infantry. And Gunner's he told me his first time in combat was a night assault on Metz. And then he told me about another time that they came into town one night. They got on one side of the street, and then when they woke up in the morning, that the Germans were on the other side of the street. And he saw this one guy going to the latrine over there, and he said he plugged them. But that's about the extent of that conversation now, because everybody. I guess we were all thinking about our futures and not so much about the past. I didn't find out that one of the groomsmen at my wedding got 2 silver stars. He was a glider pilot. And I think, just getting up on one of those things ought to get you at least a Bronze Star. But anyway, there was not a lot of, say, well, I did this, I did that among the guys. We were all going on to what we wanted to do, what we wanted to like.
You wanted to move on with your life.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Without trying to sound like it was a big deal, but you take that generous guys. We had all been through, the divorce or the depression, and I think we learned a lot of lessons about being responsible and doing a job, and we wanted to do better. And I think what we really wanted to do, we wanted a better life for our children, our kids. We wanted to give them something that we didn't have, and we wanted a home, so you had to work for that. So that's kind of the attitude I think we had. So even though you may have been a big shot in the war, you were still your friend, your golfing buddy at home.
When we first exchanged emails and talked about Gunter, you told me those guys like Gunter bore the brunt of our success. And still, with your work detecting enemy aircraft, you probably saved thousands of lives, and you certainly helped shorten the war. Do you feel like you're not getting enough recognition compared to more famous units like the U.S. paratroopers or Rangers?
Yeah, well, I think the limited service, of course, saved me from, getting into combat. But I think, looking back on it, Clement, we all kind of did the job that we were supposed to do.
Yeah.
I probably, I can't say I was the best soldier ever because, I didn't get the Good Conduct Medal until my last hour in the Army, and the guy didn't want to give it to me. But now I'm really interested, in the war. I'm learning more about what we did and what the hazards were. There's a book by Eric Larson called Normandy 44. It's about the invasion and about establishing the beachhead. And those guys really, really saw it, But a lot of them, came out, they were fine. Now, well, I guess it was our youth sort of saved us, and our soldiers, we had I think, even in the Depression, I mean, if you had a sense of humor, you could kind of overcome a lot of life's hardships and disappointments. You had to be able to kind of laugh at yourself once in a while and know that you're not high and mighty, and that's why nobody bragged about what they did in the war.
Right. You went back to France in 2015. How was it like? Did it bring back good or bad memories?
Yeah, it did. The day that we were at the beach, it turned out to be almost like the weather that was there on D-Day.
Yeah.
It was cloudy and overcast. The only difference was there wasn't anybody on the beaches.
Yeah.
And the pillbox. See, I didn't have to go ashore. I mean, I did not go up there see the pillboxes and the fortifications then. But then you get an idea of the extent of the Omaha Beach and the museum. I was there in, I think, 1940, 44, somewhere around in there. And then to see it, and when we went back, how it had expanded. Mm-hmm. And then, too, I don't think you could ever get over seeing all the crosses in the cemetery. Mm. But I got to say this for the Normans. I mean, they still, we were treated very well. They a complimentary tour. Everybody was just couldn't have been kinder. Mm. And that's the way it was post-war, right after the war. See, I didn't have a home. Mm-hmm. I didn't have any, family to go to. I was pretty much on my own for quite a few years. Even back in high school. Mm-hmm. And a family took me in and gave me. I took board and room there, and there's no way they could feed me for what I was paying them. Mm. But people were very kind to you. And I never realized that until later. Anyway, I practiced law for 50 years, almost 50 years, and then retired in 1997. And I settled down in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Well, thank you for sharing your story, Allen.
Thank you for asking me to do this. I'm looking forward to, seeing not only your book, but the broadcast that you're going to do.
Sure. I'll send it to you very soon. By the way, to conclude it, do you have a message for the younger generations?
Yeah. The person to depend on is yourself. Mm-hmm. Your self-reliance is probably the greatest gift that you can have. And don't depend on others. Just develop a sense that you can handle things. Mm. And I think that's what we all learned growing up in the Depression and in World War II. Mm-hmm. That's probably where we were the best, was the ability to improvise, the ability to invent things and to, take your K-ration carton, which was wax, and you could light that up and you could put water in your helmet and you could heat water. You could have hot water for a shave. That's just the way that you could adapt.
Yeah.
I know this is a part of our interview, but I got to tell you about my son.
Yeah.
His name is Wilson Greene, and Will is a Civil War historian.
Yeah.
He's a public historian, mm-hmm. and he's pretty well known for that. One of his books is just named the Book of the Year by the U.S. Historical Society. But I'm talking about young people. I took him when he was about 6th grade. I thought, well, it's about time he saw our nation's capital. So one spring vacation, then we jumped in the car and we're driving over. And on our way to Washington, D.C., you had to stop in Gettysburg. Mm-hmm. And you probably know that Gettysburg was one of the major battles of the Civil War.
Yeah.
And we had a guide, and he took us around, and explained, a lot of the things. The next morning, we got up to continue on to Washington, and Will didn't want to leave. He wanted to go and visit more of the sites, more about the war. And as a result of that, then he went on, to major in history, or, the Civil War. So anyway, that's one thing, history is so important.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me when my father took me when I was a kid to Omaha Beach and the Colville Cemetery that you mentioned earlier. It got me interested in history and World War II, and here I am.
Yeah, well, isn't it? You have to get your inspiration from someplace, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
And your father and your mother are the best ones to put you on the right path.
Sure, they are. Well, thank you very much for your time, Allen, and most of all, for everything you've done to help win this war and our freedom.
Well, thank you for recording it, and thank you for asking me to do this.
You're welcome. That's the least I could do.
All right. Well, best of luck. Bonjour.
Thank you. Take care.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I am always amazed by how humble these veterans are. Allen says he did the job he was supposed to do, but I wonder if they will ever understand how much their actions mean to us, young Europeans, enjoying today the freedom they brought us on this day, 75 years ago. Next month will be a special episode. I won't be talking to a veteran this time, but to my publisher, as the big day is finally coming near. Till Victory will be released worldwide by Pen and Sword Books in late October. It's a dream come true after all those 15 years of hard work, and I can't wait for you guys to read all those incredible stories. There are more than 50 different Allied soldiers honored in the book with their personal letters published for the very first time, and I hope that they will all get the recognition they deserve. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. There are a lot of great episodes coming with more veterans, I promise. Make those stories known, share them around, and hit the like button on whatever you're listening to them on. All the links for the book and social media are on tillvictory.com, and I appreciate all your messages. Till next time, thank you for listening.